Welcome to this episode of the Virulent Vortex, a podcast in which we discuss infectious disease across scales from molecules and pathogens to population, pandemic, the planet, and everything in between. My name is Lance Waller. I'm a professor of biostatistics and bioinformatics in the Rollins School of Public Health. And with me today is Professor Jaap de Roode, professor of biology at Emory University and a guest on today's show. Jaap, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So Jaap, tell us a little bit about your infectious disease research and the scales at which that operates.
Yeah, so I think of skills really as skills of biological organization. So a lot of my work has focused on understanding how processes within the host affect processes at the population level. So you can really think of an individual host as being infected. Some of my work is focused on malaria. So we can think of different malaria parasites inhabiting the bloodstream of a single individual host or single individual patient if it's a human. And what is interesting about it is that you can really view it as those parasites interacting with each other, competing with each other, just like you would see different animals compete, say, on the savannah. And so there is competition for resources, such as red blood cells. They also are affected by the same immune system. So you get interactions between those different parasite strains. And so understanding what the effects of that are at the population level is really important. For example, when we think about drug resistance. So some parasites will be drug resistant, some will not. And it actually turns out that some of the parasites that are sensitive to drugs can suppress or competitively suppress the parasites that are resistant, and in that way actually slow down the spread of the drug resistance in a population. So by looking at those different levels, you can really understand how the processes within a host can help us or affect processes at the population level.
Right. So what's happening at that scale inside an infected person may play out on a population level over a region.
That's right. And you could even then start thinking about how can we harness that? What can we do with it? And the idea that you could actually have some sensitive parasites that are sensitive to drugs that can help in the fight against drug-resistant parasites by understanding those within host processes is really something that you wouldn't understand if you just looked at the population level.
There's also the scale in between of the vector, the insect, but you also do some biology work not related to the infectious disease at the insect scale, not mosquitoes with malaria, but tell us about the other systems you work with.
Yeah, so actually most of my work focuses on monarch butterflies, and it is infectious disease research. So we do some work on monarch butterflies that has nothing to do with infectious disease, but it so turns out that wild species, including butterflies, have infectious diseases just like we do, just like our pets do. And so trying to understand how infectious diseases affect natural populations, wild populations, is something that is really interesting to me. But it's also a really big question of skill. So when we think about a host and a pathogen, we often think of those as a one-way or two-way interaction, right? Really the host and the pathogen. But we have to think about these interactions happening with a broader ecosystem. Now, the reason I like to study monarch butterflies is, first of all, they get sick. They have a really interesting protozoan parasite that affects about 10% of the monarchs here in North America. Very common disease. But the other important thing is that monarchs are specialist feeders on milkweed. So when you think about a caterpillar, they only eat milkweeds as their larval food plants. They cannot eat anything else. And it turns out that those milkweeds are really important in driving this interaction between the host and the parasite. So what we have found is that monarchs can use different milkweeds. It has to be milkweeds, but they can use different species of milkweeds. It turns out some of these species are medicinal, and they can actually reduce infection, and monarchs can take advantage of that.
Oh, it's fascinating. So the self-medication in a system. And this is an infectious disease that's working entirely independently of a human component,
exactly. Yeah.
Although human interaction with the environment can play a role.
Absolutely, that's right. So this is an infectious disease. I always tell people at butterfly festivals that we visit, don't worry, these parasites are not going to affect you. They do affect the butterflies, and they're actually really quite bad to the monarch butterflies. So a lot of the monarchs don't even survive to adulthood. When they do, they don't fly as well, which is very important for a species that migrates all the way to Mexico. They don't live as long. They don't mate as well. So there's a lot of negative effects. And so we were really interested in finding out if monarchs can medicate themselves. So we have done experiments where we gave caterpillars choices between medicinal milkweed, non-medicinal milkweed. found that they have absolutely no preference. But then we started looking at the mothers. So when the mothers are infected with the parasite, what the parasite does, it actually forms tons of spores on the abdomen of the butterfly. And when that female lays eggs, she will transfer some of those spores to the eggs, to the milkweed. The caterpillars come out of the egg, then they start eating up the parasite. So that's how they become infected. But when the mother is infected, she will actually prefer to lay those eggs on medicinal milkweed. So given a choice, she will go for the medicinal milkweed, lay her eggs on that, and that gives her offspring a much better chance at survival. So it's really kind of this mother knows best, transgenerational medication where the mother preventatively medicates her offspring.
Oh, that's fascinating. And you also mentioned migration, which would be another large scale, and you and I are working with a student currently. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so migration is, of course, one of the main things that people know monarch butterflies for. And in fact, when I go to festivals, people always assume I work on monarch butterflies because they migrate. And I always tell them, no, I like butterflies because they get sick. As an infectious disease biologist, parasites are really intriguing to me. But yeah, the migration is very much affected by the parasite. I mentioned earlier that the parasite reduces the ability of monarchs to fly. So they just, if you think of it, if you had flu, and I know you don't have flu today, but say you had flu and you wanted to run a marathon, that's going to be really, really difficult. If you don't have flu, it may still be difficult, but it's going to be easier, right? So think of it with the butterflies the same way, flying thousands of miles from Canada and the northern states of the United States down to Mexico. That is a really, really big trek. And if you're sick, it's just not going to happen. And so what we see is that infected butterflies have a much lower probability of making the migration. The interesting thing is, and this is a really cool skill thing too, so the individual butterfly suffers, but the population benefits. Because every year you have this migration that takes out millions and millions of these infected butterflies. And that means that at the end of the season, when the monarchs make it to Mexico, there are a lot fewer infected butterflies. So the next season, the population kind of starts fresh again. That disease has been thwarted in a way. And so the butterflies start fresh again, parasite levels build up, and then migration takes care of it again.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So the migration may be related to their resources, but it also generates a healthier population.
Absolutely, yeah.
With that, I'd like to thank Jaap once more for joining us today. Fascinating work. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and especially here to share with the others.
It's been great being here. Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed the conversation and look forward to seeing you at the next episode.